Hi guys, welcome to my channel, The Crafted Studio Company. I am here today with another holiday decorated cookie workshop tutorial with my company Sugar Bee Cookies here in Western Canada. Today we are going to be doing my Gingerbread Love collection, and we're going to be doing these 4 cookies, which are actually going to be a little bit different than these ones. These were my original sample cookies, and I had intended the workshop and tutorial to be with royal icing transfers that you could apply on like stickers to your icing, but I want to teach you guys how to actually do these things instead of having them pre-done for you. So we're going to do a couple of little different tips and tricks today, but get the same look in this collection. If you haven't purchased one of my DIY kits, that's not a problem. You can still follow along. You just make your own cookies and your own icing, and I'll talk about the consistencies of the icing here in a moment. For those of you that did get a kit, your kit will include it'll include a total of 8 cookies. You'll get 2 each of 4 designs. You'll get a sort of an arch or an arc shape. You'll get a house. This one always throws me off for some reason if it's upside down. You'll get a house, and you'll get a gingerbread man. You'll also get a heart, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm sorry about the condition of my heart cookie for the sample here. I was filming and I had a mishap with the camera. So I scraped the cookie so that we could start again. So that's what you're just seeing, is a scraped cookie, but it still works. So if you're at home, you'll want to make sure you have a gingerbread man, a heart of any shape. It doesn't have to be this particular shape. You'll want a house, or you can just cut your own general house shape. You could do a big square and then just cut off the corners, and an arch. Your kit will also include, just keep those out for a moment. Your kit will also include icing. So we're going to be working with a medium consistency icing, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes with the demonstration. You'll get a brown or a tan, an accent green, detail red. You'll get snow and icing drip white, and you'll get just a tiny little one of a charcoal for eyes and a mouth on the ginger person. I'm going to set all this stuff aside and talk about what the kit also includes, which is a scribe tool. So this is a needle or scribe tool. It is a cookie decorator's best friend. It helps us manipulate the icing once we've piped it on. It helps us pop air bubbles and fix any mistakes. You want to make sure you have something like this on hand. A toothpick works. You could also go to a craft section or a knitting section in a craft store or Walmart and get a knitting needle, but a really fine pointed one. And you'll want to make sure you sterilize it. Each of the kits also comes with a manual or sort of a guidebook, and it talks about the tutorial itself, a little bit about me and my cooking. Talks about the kit supplies, so you make sure that you have everything. We talk about royal icing consistencies, which we'll get back to in a moment. You'll get my recipes for both sugar cookies and royal icing. And then there's a step-by-step guide for each and every single cookie that we do. So you'll get a visual and written instructions as well as the tutorial link. Okay, I'm just going to set the cookies aside. Royal icing consistencies. When you get royal icing off your mixer, most recipes are going to be for a really thick, stiff royal icing. And this is actually a little looser than most recipes call for. This is just how mine comes off. But this would be what we want to pipe flowers with, and anything that you really need to hold its shape. This is also sort of the glue if you're making actual real gingerbread houses and stuff and you want to stick things together for 3D cookies. This would be the consistency, or even a little bit thicker, that you want to use. This is too thick for our needs today. What we're looking for is a medium consistency. So we're looking for an icing that, let's just see if I can that'll let us outline our shapes and fill and flood them so that they flood flat and level themselves out. And a medium consistency does that well. You can also work with a piping consistency to do your outline and a flood consistency, which is much thinner. If you know about icings, this is just sort of an all-in-one great starter base for people who don't know how to work with royal icing and are just learning. Quite often, as a decorator, like say this one color of brown, I would actually be using in 3 different consistencies to do my collections. I would have a really stiff one, a really loose one, and a medium one, depending on the details I want to do. But we want to keep this easy for you, and we want this to be something that you can do at home. So a medium consistency is what we're looking for. And you can look to your guide on the Royal Icing page, and you can see I talk about the different consistencies and something that is called heel time. And what a heel time is that when we mark the surface of the leveled out, I'm just looking for a little tool here. When we mark the surface of our leveled out icing like this, that wound or that mark, that scar should heal itself within 12 to 15 seconds. And it's even better if it really responds to a little shimmy. And you can see it's disappearing, and that's exactly what we want. So we want something that allows us to, just so you can see it, we want something that allows us to have sort of a flow, even though it's thicker, off a spoon, where it falls off the spoon in a nice ribbon and kind of leaves a little bit of a mark or a line for a moment, but then levels itself out within 15 seconds. So that's the consistency we're working with today. That is a medium consistency. I go over in some of my other workshop tutorials from this series, how to mix that with water and stir it up and really look to it. A little bit more detail in those other tutorials, but for today, we're just going to jump into it. So first and foremost, I want to show you how to prep your icing bag. Now I've prepped all my icing bags other than my white. So I'm just going to show you, when you get your icing bag, you want to make sure that you give it a good massage. Really mix that color, because sometimes the color will separate a little bit and it'll be mottled. And that's just the moisture and the pigmentation of the gel coloring coming apart from the icing itself. So you just want to hand mix that anytime you get a DIY kit. Or if you've bagged your icing in advance, if you've done it a day or two in advance, then you'll want to make sure you do that. Just give it a good massage before you cut the tips off. We are working with tipless piping bags today. You can get them on Amazon and everywhere these days. You don't need a coupler and a tip, but if you are working at home on your own recipes and supplies and you have a coupler and a tip on it, you'll want to be working with a number 1 and a number 2 at the most, but whatever you're comfortable with. So to cut your icing bag, I'm going to try and get really close to the camera here. To cut your icing bag, and you'll have to forgive my food color stained fingers, but you'll want just the tiniest little nick off the top. And I'm not even going to take that whole amount off. That's just me where I'm going to pinch it, and I'm just going to cut the smallest amount off. And when it comes out, it should come out with a nice simple squeeze. It should come out really easy. If you have to squeeze really hard or it's curling up on the end of the tip, either your icing is too thick, if it's not one I made, or your hole needs to be just a little tiny bit bigger. So I would suggest cutting just a hair of that plastic off the tip every time. Most people want to cut too much, or they do by mistake, and you'd be surprised how fast and thick icing will come out if it's cut even just a little too big. So always best to go smaller and cut more if you need to. So your icing should flow really easily. Now in another color, I'm just going to show you, I'm just going to wipe this surface off, how to get comfortable with your icing. I'm going to use the brown because I have the most of it. You'll also want to make sure you have a cloth handy because you want to wipe your tips in between things, and same with your needle tool as you're working with it. So I'll just keep the cloth in my lap. There we go. So when you're working with an icing, a real icing, you want the bag, the thickest part, to be in the palm of your hand. If you can get comfortable right away holding your other hand against the icing bag or against your wrist, you'll find you'll gain more control. Most people try and do it upright or just one hand, and you will have the absolute most control if you can learn this sooner than later. So in order to work with royal icing, you're going to let that icing kind of come out of the bag just a little bit, and you're going to squeeze and you're going to lift. Oops, I broke my line. Okay, let's try that again. You're going to squeeze, lift, and let your icing fall into place. Don't go right up, right and down. Your icing won't come out right. You want to go on an angle, and you want to make sure you lift. That is the key. And I'm still not doing this very well, but it's because I can't get right on visually. The camera's in my way to get over top of it here, so I'm doing this from an angle. But the lift and letting your icing drop is critical. If you try and draw right on your sheet, you'll get a thicker line that's inconsistent and it won't be straight. Lifting off the surface and letting your icing drop will give you the most control. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but give it a practice because it really will give you the most control overall. I keep breaking my line, and that is because I'm not squeezing consistently enough. So play around on a piece of parchment or wax paper or on a surface that you can wipe, and get a little bit comfortable with that before we get onto the cookies. Normally in my classes, I would give everybody sort of practice sheets that they can work on. But this one, we're just gonna go right into it. So my heart cookie, my poor heart that I had to scrape off. My camera failed on me and I didn't realize. What we're going to be doing is, I'll move these ones out of the way. We're going to be creating this look, but rather than the candy cane being a detail that we apply to the top, I'm going to show you how to do a wet on wet royal icing technique where we go right into the brown icing with the colors to create a candy cane effect. We're also going to probably go the candy cane on the opposite way, just because it'll be easier for most. I want to do a little bit of a scratch in my surface. You don't have to do this. This is just a good visual for people who are learning of where I want my wavy lines at. And you don't have to do that like this. This is just a general uneven drippy line. And that's the beauty of this. It's going to be very, very forgiving. What we're going to do first, we're going to start with our brown. And I always start at the bottom point, and I'm going to come up about 3/4 of the way. Unfortunately, that's not going to be as clear for you to see because of the previous icing I had on here. But I'm going to go on either side. And then I'm going to follow that little score mark I did with my scribe tool. Or I'm just going to freehand it to create sort of a wavy, uneven top. And right off the bat, I'm going to go in and I'm going to squeeze much harder. You can see how much icing is coming out. I'm squeezing much harder. And I'm going to work around the outline of my cookie. And I'm not going to worry too much about it being perfect. You can see it's really not perfect at all. But this icing will level itself out. And if it's not leveling itself out, just give it a little shake. And we can come back in with our scribe tool and move that icing around. If you have a lot of bare spots and you're really having to work your icing to try and get it connected and leveled out, it means you don't have enough. Go back in and add more. You want icing that you can really grab and move and manipulate. Now again, I'm not able to quite get into the angles of how I normally would decorate, so I'm doing this at a funny view for me. Okay. So while it's still wet, I'm going to show you guys a really fun trick to get a candy cane. And you can do this on any wet icing. We are going to, actually I'll show you first on a piece of parchment. We are going to be doing a series of dots. So I'm going to do my red first. And you'll end up with 5 or 6 dots. Okay, we're going to be doing that right into the icing, and then we're going to be coming through with our white in between. And you can see it kind of looks like a candy cane. And when it's in the icing, we're going to be drawing around the edge of the dots, grabbing it as I go, and you can see it created a candy cane. Now it will look smoother once it's in the icing, because this is, you know, it's going to blend with the brown, but just to give you a little bit of practice there. So we're going to go in and we're going to do that. Now I'm not going to lie, candy canes are a shape that I have the most ridiculous trouble with. It's really weird and I don't know why. So if anybody has tricks or tips out there, put it in the comments below for me. Okay, so we're going to pipe 1 dot, and I'm going to come around like this. So you don't really want to score your icing because it could manipulate it too much. This one's healing itself really quick, but just to give myself a reference, you're going to come in with your dots. So I've done 6 red dots, and they don't have to be perfect. Don't worry about that. If you find that they have really stiff peaks on them, you can just tap that down, but they should level itself. And I'm going to come back in between each. And it's fine if you're going a little bit over top. It doesn't matter. With your white. I'm just going to gently tap my cookie so that those kind of sink and meld together. And we're going to work around the outside. I'm trying to go nice and slow so you guys can see it. And I'm just going to actually pull this down on this side a little bit more just to curl my candy cane. There we go. And you can see, voila, candy cane. How fun is that? You guys can go ahead and do another one if you want, but visually, this is what we're going for, just for the design of the collection. We're going to end up with a cookie that looks like this. So we're going to add some green accents after, but first we want to get our sort of white drippy icing on the top. Now, if you can let this cookie rest a couple of minutes, that would be great. This is a great time to kind of just make sure you're prepped with everything. All your icing bag tips are cut. You just want the edges to kind of crust over a little bit before we apply the white. Now, to do the white, you can turn your cookie if it's easier. I'm just going to go up against near my brown, and I'm going to outline my top. And you can probably see that I'm leaving some of the edge of the cookie. And that's because when I fill it, it's going to push that out a bit. If you want to, you can go in and outline your squiggles, and you can actually go on top of it and readjust the shape if you want. It's very forgiving because we're just doing a drippy look. And immediately I'm going to go through and fill my white. And you can work around the outsides if you want to, or you can just work section by section, whatever you find easiest. And again, we're going to fix all those weird lumps and bumps and bare spots with our needle tool. So I will say this off the bat is that my brown icing today that I'm working with is actually just a little loose. The medium consistency that I was doing a demonstration for is actually what this white is coming out as. So you can see it just holds its shape for a moment longer than my brown did, but then it levels itself. So at this point you want to give your cookie a little tap or a shake, but it's really hard to grab it and not muck it up. So I quite often will just grab my needle tool. I'll grab the cookie. I won't press down into the cookie, but I'll just grab the cookie base itself and give it a little shake, shake, shake. And then you can just tap out that little spot there. All right, so we want to add a little bit of an accent detail here beside our candy canes. And in my little workshop series, I'm going to just do a series of groups of little dots. Just for like candy dots, almost like we're adding a little candy pieces. I did a little holly piece here, but again, those were sort of like a pre-done sheet of icing transfers I was going to give everybody, but I think that this is more fun to learn. And the dots, I'm just going to go nice, different size dots. I'm going to squeeze more. So to do a dot, you're just going to squeeze almost upright, and you're going to keep your tip there and squeeze until you get the size dot that you want, and then pull out and release. I'm going to do one right over here. And there we go. You have an adorable gingerbread heart. Some cookies are always meant to be just a little simpler in design. It's when you pull the whole collection together that you really get how your cookie collection should look. So don't worry if you don't like it right off the bat. Go back and look at the whole collection together and then decide if you want to add more details. So the next cookie we're going to be working on is our gingerbread man. Gingerbread person, I guess would be the right way. You could make a gingerbread lady if you wanted to, and a little bow and little eyelashes and stuff if you're feeling really confident with your piping. But I am going to stick to this in my lesson plan. The difference here is I'm going to show you a different way to do this scarf so that we don't have to wait for dry time in between this layer and this piece that goes on top. Because if we tried to do the scarf this way, we would find that all of this definition here would bleed together. So I'm going to do that a little bit different. Plus, I want to show you guys a new technique. So for this one, we are going to outline your gingerbread person. And take your time, but you can see how high I'm lifting off my cookie surface to let the icing fall in place. And that gives me time to move my wrist around and correct if I notice my line is going askew. And if you find you have a section that you don't like, or if it breaks, like if it broke, and then you can just go back in over top of it. And then just use your needle tool to kind of correct anything out. And we're going to go in and flood this right away. And you can go all the way around and around and around towards the center if you want, or you can kind of do it by section, whatever you find most comfortable. You just want to make sure that you get the edges as soon as possible because those are going to dry up. And you want the icing to kind of meld together for a clean, seamless line. And again, please remember that I'm doing this from a very funny angle and not a normal position. And you can almost see I'm shaking a little bit. That's how hard I'm squeezing to get the icing out. If you need to take a break and relax your wrist, do it, because this is actually very, very, very hard on hands. If you have any issues with your hands, tendinitis or carpal tunnel, arthritis, you can always just squeeze your icing into a dish and loosen it up just a little bit more with water. And you can spoon feed your icing. You can do your outline and spoon feed your icing in and then level it off that way. It takes a lot of practice, but it is a lifesaver for wrists and hands. And it is something that I do normally when I'm decorating because I do have problems with my wrists. Okay, and then you're just going to work around and make sure any spots are filled out and that everything is level and any air bubbles are popped. I'm going to move him up aside and then give him a shimmy, 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 shake. And while this is wet, we are going to create these little rosy cheeks. And this is another wet on wet technique. So what I'm doing is I'm just choosing my cheek placement. So I'm going to want my cheeks sort of halfway across the face on either side. And I'm going to be squeezing, I'm going to clean my tip. I'm going to be squeezing a little bit of white right into that brown icing on either side. And then I'm going to squeeze just a little bit of red onto it, into it. And then I'm going to just carefully be sure you know where you're touching your cookie so you don't muck your icing. And I'm actually going to stir and mix that up together. You really don't want a lot of red in this. You want more white. Just to create those little rosy cheeks. Try not to grab too much of the brown. It's okay if you do. These don't have to be hugely defined. You just want little rosy areas, almost like he's blushing. If you have edible markers, you can wait till your cookie dries and just do that then. But I'm just creating these little blush areas. And we're going to be putting our smile on that anyways. So, okay. So we need to let this cookie set for a couple of minutes. We need him to crust over a little bit before we do any of the details on him. Otherwise, those details are going to do exactly what this did and sink in and become level. And we want everything to kind of be its own thing. So what we're going to be doing is setting that aside. And we're going to move on to our next cookie and get sort of situated with that. So with cookie decorating, quite often we're working in cycles. I gotta fix my chair here. There we go. All right, so we're gonna be working on our arch. And the first thing we wanna do is our doorway. So let's just get a sample here. We're gonna be doing a cookie that looks a lot like this. The only difference is I don't think we're going to be doing 2 candy swirls. A little piece of icing. We're going to be just doing 1 candy swirl. So what we want to do with this cookie is we kind of want to take the cookie. I'm going to just scratch the cookie to give myself a little mark. You probably won't be able to see that on the camera, but you can go ahead and do the same thing for yourself. But I'm basically just sectioning it into thirds. And this is going to give me an idea of where my top is going to go and where my top of my door is going to go. And in the middle of that bottom section, I'm just going to create an arched little door. So we're going to get him on first. And this doesn't have to be perfect. But just do a little simple arched doorway. And you can go ahead and fill him in. You can actually see I'm picking up. If you leave your outline a little bit, just for a moment, like a good 30 seconds before you fill, you won't pick up and move the outline like I just did at the top of the door with the flooded icing. Don't fuss with this too much because we're going to be adding more details to sort of fix the shape, like the doorknob and the framework and stuff. So, and by the time we get everything on here, you're going to sort of not see any of the sort of wonk that you might not like. So what we're also going to do is we're going to outline this, and I'm going to start, you can start on either side, wherever you're most comfortable. I'm going to start on this side, which is a bit backwards for me, but it is going to allow you to see. I'm going to start right up near that red, and I'm going to outline my bottom, and I'm going to go up to that sort of third mark that I talked about in thirds, so 2/3 of the way up, and then I'm going to do the other side. And you can see I'm spinning my cookie around. This gives me the best vantage point and access, and it also lets me line and outline the way I'm comfortable. Because you might not be comfortable pulling down or across. You might want to just spin the cookie and do it the way you're most comfortable. Okay. And then we want to create those little wavy marks at the top too for our icing drips. And there's no rhyme or reason. Just do an uneven wavy line. Now we need this door frame to crust over just a bit on the edges before I fill this. Otherwise our colors are going to bleed together. So we can actually come in if you want, and you can just take the time to outline your top. Just give yourself a little more time. I wouldn't fill this in just yet. We want to fill in the icing after the brown like we did on this cookie, so that you get that really like it's dripping over the gingerbread. If we do it first and then the brown next, the brown is going to look like it's going into the icing. We kind of want to just create a different effect. So while that is crusting over, what we can do is we can actually go back to our gingerbread man. And he should be crusted over just enough for us to do the next step, which is sort of these little icing details. So you're going to take your white, and we're going to just create on his wrists or his arms little squiggly lines. Oops, I don't like that squiggly line. That came out funny. If you want to try and pick up your icing, you can, but instead, what I would do is just kind of use your needle tool to pull it and move it how you want. I have a little clog in my tips, so you want to make sure you clean your tips in between everything. There we go. That's more what I'm looking for. And these don't have to be perfect. They're meant to be sort of that quick baker's icing. Just that little accent detail. So. Okay, so we also want to go in, oops, I'm touching my icing. Be very, very careful, and if you do muck your icing, just take your needle tool and kind of stitch it together. Just tap it and it should fix itself. So I want to do the eyes, and how we're going to be doing the eyes, I will show you. On a piece of parchment here. With the eyes, I'm going to be taking my black icing. I'm going to be creating a nice big dot and letting it level out a bit. If you find it's a little askew, you can just use your needle tool to kind of shape it, but don't mess with it too much. But then I'm going to be taking at the very bottom corner out here, I'm going to be taking white and squeezing that on top and letting it rest in. And you can always just touch. And when I mean touch, I'm not even squeezing. I'm just letting that icing come out and I'm touching. Just for a little highlight in the eye. So that's how we're going to do the eyes. So we're going to be working sort of on the inside above our cheek blushes. I'm going to squeeze and squeeze. Then I'm going to come in on the very bottom corner and just squeeze some white. A little goes a long way here. And I'm going to touch and touch. That's it. And for the mouth, you might want to practice piping a nice, really thin line for the mouth as best you can. But I'm just going to be taking my icing and touching it to my surface of my icing on the brown and just doing a nice little swirl. You can add a little cheeky, smirk if you want. Okay, clean off that tip. And right over top of that blush area, I'm going to be just doing this little, I actually like doing just a little half off to the side. I find it's easier and it just looks cheeky and sassy and fun. You can use your needle tool to draw it out a little bit if you want. I wouldn't fuss with it too much. Cookies will quite often look funny as you go, but as you put on more details, it'll get better and better. The next step we want to do is just add a couple of buttons. So just nice squeeze, some nice large dots. And you want to make sure you leave a good section in here. So don't go too high up. That's why we're only doing 2. You could do a third one if you want to. But I want to leave this area in here for a scarf for those of you that want to add a scarf detail. And again, before we go on to the scarf, we're actually going to put him aside and go back and work on our arch doorway. Because this is now crusted up enough for us to come in and flood our gingerbread section. There are very few cookie decorating styles that let you do a cookie from start to finish. My wet on wet tutorial, that was the first one I posted a couple of weeks ago. I'll try and put the link in the corner up there. But that one is available, and those cookies can be done from start to finish because you're working all your wet icing into your wet icing. My piped green, rustic holiday greens also, that's part 2. That one was one that you could do sort of the cookie from start to finish. But because we're dealing with sections here, like the doorway versus this versus the icing, you need to give time in between each and cycle between cookies. If you want to, you can just pipe right around the door. You can outline it if you want as well. We're going to be adding a detail there, so it doesn't really matter. Whatever you're most comfortable with. All right. So this is quite a big area to cover. This is going to take some time. Okay. And don't overfill. You want to let and see where the icing is going to flood itself, because it will fill those sections that are bare, that don't look bare as you're sort of piping it. You go in and just fix any spots. And I can see I actually didn't massage my brown enough. I'm getting sort of a mottled, almost like a wood grain effect, which I don't hate in my icing. So just make sure if you're getting that, go back in and pinch the tip and massage the bag. Okay, so with this one, we do want to let that rest a minute so that the brown does start to set up and crust. But we can go in. Actually, we're gonna let that crust over. We're gonna let the brown do its thing. So we're gonna sit him aside. And our gingerbread man is still crusting over. So what we can do is go on and start with our house. And it's very similar to this one that we're working with. So our house, we want to think about where we're going to be piping our brown and our door. So I'm going to make a little door. And we're going to start with our door. And it's exactly the same as we did with this one. We're just going to pipe a little arch. And then we're going to fill it in. I'm just going to give it a minute to crust over. But the placement of this one, wherever the corner of your roof is, you kind of want to make sure it's a little lower than that. We want space in between to be able to do some of these accents. Okay. And go in. You can use the tip of your icing to move the icing around too. You don't have to wait for your needle tool. You can kind of do it as you go a little bit. And this is where you can kind of fix the shape if you want to move the shape out a bit. And then let it rest. Give it a little shake, shake, shake. We can outline our roof if we wanted to. And how I'm doing that, the paper you hear is just me kind of going through the steps because I want to make sure I follow the same steps as I've outlaid in the manual. For the roof, I'm going to pick a spot in the middle, but I'm going to leave room for the white. And I'm just going to create, you can come straight down if you want to, but I'm just going to create a couple of like little, it's called gingerbread detail actually on houses. That little scallop. If you're not comfortable with that, don't worry about it. Just come straight down. You know, you could come straight down like this. And that could be your roof line. It doesn't matter. I guess I should scrape that off since I'm going to put the white in there after. Okay. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be completely balanced. But then I'm going to also come down and I'm going to just outline the side of the house and the bottom of the house right up to the door. Try and connect to the door if you can. And the reason is if you have any, where'd my scribe tool go? If you have any areas like, I don't know if you guys can see this, any gaps, anywhere, if you had a gap here or here, when you go to fill your icing, it can flow out of there. So you want a good barrier. Okay, we're going to let that crust up for a moment. So we're going to set him aside. Just careful when you're moving these aside. And we are going to come back to our gingerbread man. Okay. So for the gingerbread man, I want to show you guys a technique with, he should be crusted up just enough now. He's still shiny, but I can see that my icing's not going to melt into the icing. And what I'm going to be doing, and I'm out of parchment paper, that's okay. What I'm going to be doing is creating teardrops. So I'm going to squeeze a nice big dot and pull it. Almost like as I'm pulling down like that. Creating a tail off of it. So I'm going to be doing those in a chain. So it's going to look like this. I'm going to squeeze a dot and pull down and release. And then right at the bottom of that tail, I'm going to squeeze a dot and pull down again. And squeeze a dot and pull down. And squeeze a dot and pull down. I'm creating a whole chain effect of these beads, or a knit. And I'm going to be using that technique for his scarf. If you're more comfortable just piping a line and filling that in, go ahead and do that. For this, I find it easier if you kind of turn them to the side a little bit. And you can make yourself a guideline, like you can pipe just a little line if you want so you know where you're working. But I'm going to be squeezing and pulling, and I'm trying not to pull into my previous icing. I'm working on top. Squeezing and pulling down, squeezing and pulling, squeeze and pull, squeeze and pull, and I'm following that line. And then what we can do is we can create a scarf end or scarf tail. And I want it to be about there. And you can work right over top of this. Squeeze, pull down, squeeze, pull down, squeeze, pull down, and squeeze. And you have the gingerbread man. And we're going to let him dry. Okay. And then we're going to come back to our arch, which should be crusted over just enough now for us to come in and do our white. So we're going to fill, I'm going to flip them over. I just see it easier. And you can pipe right over top of your brown if you want to, or right next to it, or however makes you comfortable. Again, this is that, there's no right or wrong here because this is an icing drip that I'm going to squeeze almost just over top of that brown a little bit. You have to squeeze quite hard to get all this icing out. If you're going a less pressure, it's going to take you a lot longer to fill it, and that's okay. It just will come out in thinner lines and take more time to fill. I'm going to fix this right here. I didn't like the way that connected, so you can see I just moved my icing. And I can see it's a little lumpy and bumpy up here, so I'm just going to give it a little shimmy shake. But I'm not going to try and disturb it too much, because when this is crusting over, you can actually crack it if you move the cookie too much or too fast. So now another detail that we can go in and do is we can add little dots around the edge of the door, just tiny little dots. I'm just squeezing for a moment and lifting off. I'm just going to frame the door. These little candy accents. Oops. And if you globbed any together, you can just go in and use your scribe tool to try and separate them or pick it up. Okay, so we're going to let him rest for a moment more and crust up. And we're going to come back to our gingerbread house, and we're going to fill in the gingerbread section. Just take your time with this. And if your icing bag is feeling like it's getting too loose at the top, just go in and pull the icing down. Make sure you do it away from your cookie so that if it drips out, it doesn't drip onto a part of the cookie you don't want it to be. And I just give it a twist so that I have something to hold on to and grip again. Now, if you've gone off your cookie a little bit, pull back from piping more into it and just kind of push it back up, because the more you push into around it is going to push that off the edge. Sometimes you slip and go across your barrier outline. So you can see I lift it off and I still have bare spots. I don't want it too full. I want to reserve some of that icing for my next cookies. As long as it's not too bare, you should have enough icing to manipulate and move around. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about how this looks up top because I can fix that when I do my white. But you can always just kind of go through and fix the shape of it. Give it a little shake, shake, shake. And we're going to come back to our arch. Okay. So with the arch, what we want to do is create some of these candy swirls. And how I'm doing that is I'm going to create a nice big round dot, but then I'm going to start widening out my dot. So I'm going to create a circle, and I'm not dragging into that brown icing. I'm just giving myself a general, you can see it's not perfect. I'm just giving myself a general round, and I'm going to carefully stabilize my cookie, and I'm not pressing in because I don't want to affect that brown icing. I'm just kind of doing small little, almost whisking motions, like I'm pulling the icing up and around to create those little rounds. And by doing that, I'm barely just catching it at the top, and I'm pulling it up to move it where I want it. Created a little round shape. And I'm not going to lie, rounds are not easy to do. So just try not to fuss with it too much. And also, you can see this is a lot smaller. Make sure you stop on your second one when it's smaller, because it gets bigger when you manipulate it. And this is why you want to make sure you let your brown crust over for about 5 minutes first and work on other cookies, because otherwise it sinks into the color and it'll start showing through. Okay, so while that is still wet like that, I am going to take my green and I'm going to start in the center, and I'm not squeezing very much, I'm barely touching it, and in order to create a nice thin line, and I'm just going to swirl a couple of times. You don't need to get nice tight swirls. I actually find it better if you go looser and just let that sink into the icing. And these don't have to be perfect, and they don't have to perfectly match. If you find that, like right there, you don't like it, you can go through and swirl the white on it in between again, just to clean it up. Go very slow and very minimal. You don't want to add too much icing into it because it's going to start pushing and misshaping everything. And then we can let him sit a moment, or you can go in and you can feel free to add just a couple of little, actually I'm going to start from the bottom, almost candy stick lines. Oh, and if it breaks, don't worry about it. Just go in. As long as your brown is still a little bit wet, you can eat them. Now I can see this is crusted up, and I've created this mark that won't heal unless I just kind of stitch it together. If this has been left a little longer, it might not fix itself, so just be really careful. But you can go back in and just connect your lines. I'm actually going to go right over top of the other one. And we're going to add some fun little candy dots in various sizes. It's kind of like a cobblestone effect, or, you know, mimicked by candy dots. Now we still have one other detail to do in the center, which is little hearts, or you can just leave it like that. You know, I did a heart on this one. I want to let it dry a little bit more before I do a heart. Oh, make sure you go in and add a doorknob. And you can see on this one I added swirls to my icing on everything, but I actually really like it just clean the way it is. But you can go in and when that dries a bit, add swirls, but we'll come back to that. We'll come back and do the heart. So I'm going to set him aside and let him rest up. And I should be good to go to do the roof of my icing here. So I'm going to start near my brown in the corner there, the corner of my roof, and I'm going to come up. And then I'm going to come down and connect there. And you can, like all the other ones we did, you could outline this, or you could actually just flood right against it if you want, like this. And again, it is really important to give your icing time to crust so that those don't blend together. This is a little too soon already for me because I'm trying to get everything done on a workshop or sort of on a tutorial time frame with the video. So I'm just going to outline it because it's bleeding together. But for those of you at home, just give this a couple of more minutes. Kind of clean up your station and prep things, or pause the video and just give that brown a moment more. Now this is meant to be like snow on a roof, so if it's lumpy and bumpy, that is fine. Quite often when I'm doing snow on my own gingerbread style cookies, I make it thicker so that it does have all the ridges and dips and stuff. Okay. So we can either add candy swirls in here or one on top here, but what I forgot to do, and we want to make sure we do this when it's still wet, is add some candy canes. So we're just doing those dots in the general shape, going in with our white. And then we're just swirling around the outsides. Now this is better to do before your brown crusts up. This was a mistake. I actually meant to do this before we did the white. But it does work if you go really slow and just gently on top. Like that as well. I lost a little definition on the end here, so I'm going to just fix that. Okay, and then we're going to create one of those candy swirls in the middle. So go ahead and create a nice big round. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to use this to move it around a bit and get the shape that you want. Be careful not to manipulate the brown icing. And we're going to do that swirl in the middle. You can see I'm holding the piping bag with my fingers of my other hand. And I came off of there a little bit, but that's okay because candy is sometimes all over the place. And if you need to fix anything up, just go in while it's still wet and just, I added a little brown there just to cover the indiscretion. And while I have my green out, oh no, I need my white. We need to outline our door. So I'm just dotting around the frame of the door. Again, I could have probably did this before we did the roof. My lesson plan is to do this with the candy canes while it's still a little more loose, and then go in and do the roof and the swirl, but got ahead of myself. It's just that kind of day. But that is cookie decorating. We roll with it. I'm just fixing up a little glob here I had. Right, I'm going to add a little door handle because my door is nice and crusted over. And I'm just going to take a peek. I think I'm going to actually add a couple of little candy dots up here too. We want that theme of these coming through in the whole collection. And I'm making them different sizes. Little clusters. And really, you can do any details you want. You can play with this as much as you want. But that is our gingerbread house done. We'll put them up aside. You can see it looks a little different. but that's okay. We're going to pull back our little arch. And I'm just going to see, oh, we had a heart in the middle here. So like this guy. And all I'm doing, you can do this a couple of different ways. You can squeeze a nice big blob and pull a teardrop down this way, and a nice big blob and pull a teardrop down this way, and you have a heart. And then you can shape it as you want. Or you can do an outline and fill it in. I like the more artistic way of this one than doing this, because I find that this leaves more room for going off skew and off your shape. And then you could just fill it this way and then shape it, whatever you're most comfortable with. So you can practice on a piece of paper or on your surface that you can wipe. I'm just going to put a nice teardrop there and one on this side. My tail came down a little far, so I'm just going to pull my icing to fill out the shape the way I want it to. And if you find that you're losing the shape at the top, in the center there where it's kind of melding together, that's okay. The fix for that is pretty simple. Just pull your icing down through the top of your heart, down to the center, and it will connect itself. And I can see I mucked up my dot right here, and he's already dry, so I'm going to probably just let him rest. But if you have a mucked up section like that, let it dry more before it gets too dry though. Just go in and pick it up. If it's drier, the whole thing should pick up. And just repipe. And that guy is done. So then we have our whole little collection here. Now I do just want to show you guys that if you want to add a little more accenting, I'm going to put them up here because you can come in with the white and add some of those swirls like I have on the snow. You don't have to. And there's really no right or wrong with this. There's these are just added little pipe lines that I'm just creating little swirls in the snow, a little texture. I'm just kind of following anywhere that there was drips, like the drip idea. And you can even just do it, you know, little swirls. Like you don't have to, just adds a little extra oomph. But before you do that, you want to make sure that your white has crusted over. So you can also just outline and do little squiggles. It's just really about getting a little texture onto your cookie for those added final details. And this one I kind of purposely left bumpy. Oh, I have a little bare spot right there. Let's fix that. So the bare spot, I just went in, filled it, and then I'm just going to quickly tap stitch it to the icing, but I'm trying not to disturb the icing that's already there because I don't want to crack it. So for this one, I'm just going to do a little swirl like this. I'm going to come down the opposite way. And you can see I'm really not doing anything perfect here. I'm just giving myself the idea of some texture. And that's our gingerbread collection, guys. So we have our heart, I'm being very careful in moving these because they're still wet. We have our gingerbread man, we have our gingerbread doorway arch, and we have our gingerbread house. Well done and congratulations. You guys did a fantastic job. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all the support. If you purchased a kit, thank you. There are other tutorials you can watch if you want to make the recipes and bake your own cookies and make your own icing. Just feel free to look through the playlist for Sugar Bee Cookies. Thanks. Have a great day.